Working nights at a rehab facility means you develop a relationship with your surveillance system that most people do not have with any piece of technology. You know the exact angle of every camera. You know which camera has the slight glare after midnight because of the way the parking lot light hits the lens. You know the blind spots. You know how long it takes someone walking at a normal pace to pass through each frame. That familiarity, after months of it, becomes a kind of comfort. The cameras become your eyes in places you cannot physically be. Our facility had a protected entrance gate with 2 cameras, one mounted above looking down at the gate itself. One of those doorbell-style cameras positioned at eye level. Both feeds ran to the office where I worked. 2 monitors on 2 different walls. I had worked that night shift for almost a year by the time this happened. The neighborhood surrounding the facility was not quiet. That is the most polite way I can describe it. We got foot traffic at all hours, people standing at the gate, people passing by, occasionally someone who seemed like they might need help. My standing rule, handed down from the people who trained me, was this: if they are not hurt, and if they are not attempting to come through the fence, you watch and you wait. You do not engage unless there is a clear reason to. I had applied that rule more times than I could count. Drunks who wandered to the gate and then wandered away. People having arguments by phone in the parking area. Occasionally someone clearly in the middle of a substance episode who would pace and then move on. I had learned to distinguish between the different categories of people who showed up at that gate. What I saw that night did not fit any of the categories. I was doing paperwork. It was sometime around 1:30 in the morning, midweek, the kind of night where things were reliably quiet. I glanced up at the monitor on my left, the camera above the gate, and saw a man walking past. Normal enough. He took maybe 6 or 7 steps past the gate entrance, and then he stopped. He stood there for a few seconds, and then slowly he turned around. He walked back to the gate. He looked directly up into the camera, and he stayed there. I want to be precise about his face, because it is the thing I cannot stop coming back to. His eyes were open, but there was nothing in them. I do not mean he looked tired or unfocused. I mean the expression on his face was so completely empty that it registered as wrong, in a way that visceral fear is different from the way you feel startled. Startled is fast and recovers. What I felt looking at this man's face on that monitor was slower. It did not go away. His eyes were fixed on the camera with the kind of focus that suggests deliberate intent. But his expression showed nothing. No aggression, no distress, no recognition, nothing. I used the intercom. I told him the facility was closed, asked if he needed help, asked if he was okay. He did not respond. He did not blink at a normal rate. He just kept looking up. I switched to the second monitor, the eye-level camera, and now I had a different angle on his face. That was almost worse. At that angle, I could see that he was not blinking much at all. His hands were at his sides, completely still. He was not swaying, not shifting his weight, not doing any of the small, unconscious movements that people make when they are simply standing somewhere. He was absolutely still, like something that had taken the shape of a man but had not quite learned all the subroutines. I tried the intercom again. Nothing. I called my supervisor. She came in, looked at the monitor, and stood beside me for a moment without speaking. I could tell from her face that she had seen unusual things at that gate before, but I could also tell this was not what she expected to see. She reminded me of the rule, not hurt, not attempting entry, watch and wait. So we watched. He stood there for 11 minutes. I know because I had been tracking the timestamp on the monitor from the moment I first noticed him. 11 minutes of standing completely still at the gate of a locked facility in the middle of the night, staring up at a surveillance camera, not saying anything, not moving, not blinking at a normal rate, and then, without any visible change in his expression, without any apparent reason, he turned around and walked away. Same direction he had come from, slow, steady steps, and he was gone. My supervisor and I did not say anything for a moment after he disappeared from the frame. Then she went back to her office. I sat alone with those 2 monitors for the rest of my shift. Every time there was movement at that gate, I felt it before I saw it. I called in 2 more times that night for reasons that turned out to be nothing. I never saw him again. I have thought about him a lot over the years since, about what was going on inside whatever was left of him, about what he saw when he looked up at that camera for 11 minutes, whether he saw me watching him, and whether that was, in some way, the point. worked night shift at a nursing home for 3 years. I know what you are thinking. Nursing homes at night. Of course, but I want you to understand something before I tell you this. I was not a skittish person. I had worked overnight care for long enough that I had seen death up close. I had held the hands of residents in their final hours. I had dealt with wandering patients and medical emergencies and every kind of difficult thing you can encounter in that environment. I was not easily rattled. The facility was an older building, converted from something else before it became a care home. High ceilings in some of the common areas, long corridors that the overhead fluorescents never quite lit the way you wanted them to. Night shift ran from 11 to 7. 3 of us on staff for the whole floor most nights. The routine was the same. Check-ins on residents every 2 hours, laundry pickup on the hour, medication checks, charting, and the long, slow hours in between, where you sat at the nurse's station and listened to the building breathe. There was a resident I will call Chuck. Chuck had been at the facility for about 2 years by the time I had established my routine there. He was sharp in a way that some of the residents were not. He remembered things, noticed things. He was particular about his belongings. The laundry system at the facility required residents to leave their laundry bags outside their doors on designated nights. Chuck did not like this. Every single time, he wanted reassurance that his clothes would come back, that they would not get mixed up with someone else's, that everything would be returned correctly. I had reassured him so many times it had become almost a ritual between us. I would stop at his door. He would ask. I would tell him the same thing I always told him. He would finally hand over the bag. We did this for months. On the night I'm telling you about, I had done my first laundry round without incident. Chuck had, after the usual back and forth, handed me his bag. I had thanked him and continued down the corridor. Everything was quiet. It was just past 2 in the morning. I had finished the laundry round, made my charting notes, and was walking back toward the common area when I saw him. Chuck, he was in the hallway, about 30 feet ahead of me, walking slowly in the direction of the game room at the end of the hall. This was not entirely alarming at first. Residents did get up at night. It happened regularly, but Chuck was not supposed to be mobile at that hour. He had been having difficulty with his legs for several weeks, and the care notes indicated that he had been largely bedbound at night. I called his name. He did not stop. He did not turn around. He just kept walking, that slow shuffling gait moving toward the game room. I called his name a second time. Still nothing. I got on the radio and called my supervisor. I told her Chuck was walking the hallway, heading toward the game room, and I was not comfortable going after him alone. She said she would send security to assist. I waited at the corridor entrance, watching the direction he had gone. A few minutes later, security arrived. We walked down to the game room together. The room was empty. The television was off. The chairs were empty. The light was off. No Chuck. The security officer asked me if I was sure I had seen him. He did not ask it in a disbelieving way, more in the way people ask when they want to understand what they are dealing with. I told him I was absolutely sure. I described what Chuck had been wearing, a pale blue shirt, the kind with the buttons at the collar. His usual slippers. We agreed to go back to his room. I think I assumed we would find him there, somehow having made it back while we were not looking, already climbing back into bed. The door to his room was open, the way it always was at night. We went inside. Chuck was in his bed. He was on his back, his hands folded across his chest. His face was still. I knew before I touched him. There were no alarms going off. His monitor had not triggered. Whatever had happened quietly enough that nothing in the room had registered it as an emergency. He had simply stopped. I stood there for a long moment. The security officer was on the phone with the nursing supervisor. I was looking around the room, and then I saw it. On the chair beside his bed, folded carefully, were the clothes I had described. The pale blue shirt, the tan slacks, his slippers set neatly beside the chair legs. There was a bag on top of the folded clothes, the kind of bag we used for resident laundry, and on the bag was a handwritten note. I could not tell you with certainty how he had written it, or when, but the note said, in Chuck's handwriting, simply this: I couldn't take them with me. I have told this story only a handful of times in the years since. Most people who hear it get quiet after the note, because that is the part that does not have an explanation that fully satisfies. Chuck had fought me for months over those clothes. He had worried every single laundry night that they would not come back. And somehow, in whatever the final hours of his life looked like, He had gathered them up and left them for whoever would find him. He had been walking that hallway at 2 in the morning in clothes that were sitting folded on a chair in his room. I do not know how. I do not have a framework that makes all of that fit together comfortably. What I know is this: I walked that corridor every night for the rest of my time at that facility, and I never once resented the fact that he had chosen to walk it one last time. I have worked security for a long time, night shifts, third shift specifically, meaning I clock in at 10 and I do not see daylight until I am already in my car and halfway home. You get used to the dark when you do this kind of work long enough. You get used to the sounds of an empty building, the way the pipes groan and settle, the way certain doors drift open because the hinges are old and the floors are uneven. You learn to stop flinching at shadows. That is what I told myself, anyway. The brewery where I worked was a massive facility. 2 main structures on the same property, maybe 200 feet apart from each other. The first was the actual brewery itself. Floor-to-ceiling stainless steel tanks. The smell of hops and malt permanently baked into every surface. Forklifts parked in rows like sleeping animals between the pallet racks. The second building was the bar, where the company hosted tours and tastings during the day. At night, the bar was where the third shift guards stationed themselves. It had a clean sight line across the entire property, long windows on the east wall, and decent lighting. It was comfortable, as far as empty bars at 2 in the morning go. My routine was the same every night. I would clock in, do an initial walkthrough of the brewery, check the storage areas, verify the loading dock was secured, check the coolers, then come back to the bar, sit down, and wait until the next scheduled patrol at the top of the following hour. My first week on that shift, I noticed something. I could not put language to it at first. It was just a feeling, the kind that sits somewhere between your shoulder blades and will not let you fully relax. I dismissed it. New job, new building, different sounds than what I was used to. My first week, my first month, nothing actually happened. The feeling came and went. Some nights I barely noticed it. Other nights, it was like a low hum in the back of my skull, from the moment I clocked in until the moment I locked up and walked to my car. The lights in the bar were automatic, motion sensitive. When I walked in from outside, they would click on as I came through the main room. Then the back room lights would follow a second or two later if I kept moving. On the night this happened, I had just finished my second patrol of the brewery. It was sometime around 2 in the morning. That particular stretch of night, where the silence gets thick and the air feels heavier than it should. I had been gone about 40 minutes, walking the full floor, checking every exit point. Nothing unusual. I came back to the bar the way I always did, through the side door that led directly into the main room. The bar itself was dark, which was normal. The lights kicked on when I stepped inside, exactly the way they were supposed to. I took a few steps in. I remember the sound of my own boots on the concrete floor. I remember the smell of the cleaning solution the day crew used on the bar top, something sharp and synthetic. And then I stopped in the doorway leading to the back room, the doorway that was partially dark because those motion lights had not yet triggered. There was something standing there. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I have spent a lot of time since that night trying to make sense of what I actually saw. And the honest answer is that I cannot. It was roughly the shape of a person. Humanoid, I think, is the word I keep coming back to. But the proportions were not right. The arms were too long. I do not mean slightly too long. I do not mean like someone tall with a long reach. I mean wrong in a way that your brain registers before your eyes can fully process it. That immediate cellular level alarm that bypasses rational thought entirely. The arms hung down past where they should have stopped. Past the hips, close to the knees. Whatever it was, most of its upper body was covered in long, dark hair, or something that resembled it. The doorway was not a large doorway. It was a standard commercial interior door opening, and the thing in it was almost too large to fit through. It stood there. It did not move. I did not move. I do not know how long we stood looking at each other, or if it was even looking at me at all. My mind was doing something strange, cycling between extreme calm and extreme terror simultaneously, like two frequencies playing at the same time, and neither one winning. And then I blinked, and it was gone. Not gone like it stepped backward into the dark. Not gone like it walked away. Gone like it had never been there. The doorway was empty. The backroom motion lights had not triggered. Nothing had moved. I ran. I do not mean I walked quickly. I do not mean I backed out carefully. I turned around and I ran through that bar, out the side door, all the way across the property to the front desk of the brewery, where my coworker was stationed for the night. I told him to turn on every light in the bar, every single one. He looked at me for a moment, really looked at me, and then he did it without asking questions. I think my face told him everything. I went back to the bar with him, every light blazing. The back room was empty. The doorway was empty. Nothing, no sign that anything had been there at all. My coworker told me later that he had seen something similar in that doorway on an earlier shift during his first week. He had not told anyone. He had decided to never work the bar alone again, and he had quietly arranged his patrols to always be back before the lights cycled off. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I thought about the fact that whatever that thing was, it had been there long enough for more than one person to see it. Long enough to become, on some level, expected, a known occupant of that backroom doorway. I still work security. I still work third shift sometimes, but I have not taken a shift at that brewery since. Some buildings tell you something is wrong with them before anything actually happens. That one told me on day one. I just did not listen fast enough. Hospital overnight shifts have their own kind of loneliness. It is not the loneliness of an empty building exactly, because hospitals are never truly empty. There are always patients. There is always some level of noise, beeps and footsteps, and the low voices of staff on rounds. But the overnight hours have a particular quality to them. The lighting changes, the hallways have more shadow, the pace slows to something almost imperceptible, and you become very aware of the spaces between things. I worked overnight maintenance and environmental services at a hospital in the Midwest for about 2 years. My job was straightforward: clean and turn over patient rooms after discharge, maintain the common areas, respond to any cleaning needs flagged by the nursing staff. Most nights were unremarkable. The work was physical, methodical, predictable. I found a rhythm in it. On the night I'm going to tell you about, I had been assigned to turn over 2 rooms on one of the medical floors. Both rooms had had patients discharged earlier that evening. The rooms were connected by an interior door, which was open between them. There was one main exit point, the door that led back into the hallway. I started with the first room. Standard procedure: strip the bed, bag the linens, wipe down the surfaces, mop the floor, restage. I worked for about 45 minutes, finished that room, and then left to get additional supplies from the cart in the hallway. The whole process of getting what I needed and coming back took about 10 minutes, maybe slightly less. I pushed the door back open to the second room. I stepped inside. I began to turn toward the bed to assess what needed to be stripped. And I saw her, a small elderly woman, sitting in the bedside chair in the corner of the room. She was hunched forward slightly. Her hands were in her lap. Her head was bowed just enough that I could not clearly see her face. She was wearing a hospital gown. My first thought was logistical. She was clearly a patient, and I had been told both rooms were vacant. My second thought was concern. She appeared to be hunched in a way that could mean discomfort. I looked at her for a few seconds, trying to determine if she was asleep or if she needed assistance. I stepped further into the room. I was about to speak when 2 nurses appeared in the doorway behind me. They had come from the hallway. One of them asked me, in a voice that was not loud but had a particular urgency to it, if I had been sitting in the chair in that room. I turned to look at them. I told them no. I had just come in. There was a woman in the chair. I turned back to point toward the corner. The chair was empty. I looked at the chair. I looked at the space around it. I looked at the door between the 2 rooms. There was no one there. There was nowhere she could have gone. The only exit was the doorway where the 2 nurses were standing. They had been there for the entirety of the moment between when I saw her and when I turned back. No one had passed them. The nurses looked at each other. One of them said something to the other that I could not fully hear. Then the one who had spoken to me looked at me carefully and asked me to describe what I had seen. I described her: small, white hair, hospital gown, hunched forward, sitting with her hands folded. The nurse's expression changed. She asked me which chair specifically. I pointed to the one in the corner. She nodded once, and then she told me a patient had died in that room 4 hours before my shift began. She had died sitting in that chair. The description I had given matched the patient exactly. I stood in that room for a moment longer than I probably should have, trying to find a logical path through what I had just been told. I had been gone from that room for 10 minutes. When I came back, she was there. She was as solid as any living person I had ever seen in a hospital chair. She was not a suggestion, not a flicker in my peripheral vision, not a shape that could have been something else. I had been looking directly at her from inside the room for several seconds before I turned away. And then she was gone. I finished my shift. I do not know how exactly, but I did. I mopped the floor of that second room. I stripped the bed. I restaged it. I kept my eyes moving, kept my hands busy, kept my breathing steady. I did not tell anyone else that night. On my next shift, 2 days later, I walked past that room and looked through the small window in the door. It was occupied by a new patient, an older man sleeping. The chair in the corner was pushed back slightly, not exactly where I remembered it being. I walked past. I have no resolution to offer you. I have no explanation that satisfied me then or satisfies me now. What I have is the memory of an old woman sitting in a chair in a room she had already been taken out of hours before I arrived, and the memory of a nurse nodding slowly when I described her, in the way that people nod when they are not surprised by something that should be impossible. I transferred to a different floor 8 months after that. I did not tell them why. Some things you carry without ever finding a place to set them down.